Today's topic is one I get asked about fairly often. While in so many other cases we are given insight into the wisdom of the wizard Gandalf, this topic, along with portrayals and adaptations, has led many to wonder if his brilliance faltered when it came to one of the age's greatest threats. Today on Nerd of the Rings, we cover Gandalf's knowledge of Bilbo's ring. I feel like today's topic has been a big one among fans for some time, and has been brought to the forefront ever since the conclusion of the Hobbit trilogy nearly 10 years ago. I remember having to revisit the issue of Gandalf's knowledge of the ring all those years ago because it can be easy to interpret Gandalf's awareness being greater than it truly is. We're gonna look at the situation with the ring, and Gandalf's knowledge of it in as close to chronological order as I can muster, in hopes this will bring into focus how this played out and why Gandalf came to the realization when he did. We know that long before Bilbo entered the story, Gandalf would have had some knowledge of the Rings of Power. After all, Cirdan the Shipwright gives Gandalf his own ring, Narya, the Ring of Fire, so that he may use it in his many adventures to come, as he works against Sauron. Gandalf, being a member of the White Council, which included the greatest elves and wizards of Middle-earth, and possessing a Ring of Power himself, knew a great deal more about the rings than the typical elf. While we don't know the exact timeline for Gandalf learning of the creation of the rings, we know that in 2850, Gandalf enters Dol Guldur, discovering the necromancer is indeed Sauron, who is gathering all rings he can while seeking for news about the One Ring and the heir of Isildur. Coincidentally, it's during this trip to Dol Guldur when Gandalf discovers King Thrain and receives the key to Erebor. 91 years later, Gandalf sends Bilbo and the dwarves on the quest of Erebor, in hopes of solving the potential problem of Sauron teaming up with the dragon Smaug. As we know, it's during their time in the Misty Mountains that Bilbo discovers the ring, and he initially leaves out any mention of the ring in recounting his tale to the rest of the company and Gandalf. While Gandalf would find Bilbo's story suspicious, Bilbo doesn't reveal the ring's existence to the wizard within the pages of The Hobbit. Only the dwarves are with Bilbo when he reveals the ring in saving them from the spiders of Mirkwood, by which time Gandalf has gone to Dol Guldur with the White Council to drive Sauron from his fortress. Eventually, Bilbo would reveal he had a magic ring, though when he says he won the ring, Gandalf does not believe him. As Frodo later tells us, Gandalf pestered Bilbo until he got the true account of Gollum and Bilbo's riddles in the dark, and his taking of the magic ring. The earliest this could have happened would be sometime in the spring of 2942, either when Gandalf and Bilbo make their way back from their journey, or some other future time when Gandalf visits the Shire. Gandalf would of course check in on the Hobbit from time to time. For instance, we know he came with Balin in the fall of 2949, 7 years after their adventure together. This is when Bilbo learns of the new prosperity of the Kingdom of Erebor and the restored Mannish realm of Dale. Just 4 years later, in 2953, the White Council would hold their final meeting, for the Tower of Barad-dûr had risen again. Then for the last time the council met, for now we learn that he was seeking ever more eagerly for the One. We feared then that he had some news of it that we knew nothing of, but Saruman said nay, and repeated what he had said to us before, that the One would never again be found in Middle-earth. At the worst, said he, our enemy knows that we have it not, and that it is still lost. But what was lost may yet be found, he thinks. Fear not, his hope will cheat him. Have I not earnestly studied this matter? Into Anduin the Great it fell, and long ago, while Sauron slept, it was rolled down the river to the sea. There let it lie until the end. When Gandalf recounts this portion of the story at the Council of Elrond, he blames himself, saying he was lulled by the words of Saruman the Wise. This is a very important point. One of Saruman's greatest powers is his voice. We find in the Two Towers that when Saruman focuses his power on a person or group of people, he can sway their hearts, plant fears, and sow lies as he pleases. This spell, so to speak, could last as long as the speech itself, or it could take root within the person's heart and last forever. Indeed, in the Two Towers chapter, The Voice of Saruman, we find that even those who are forewarned of this danger find themselves affected by his words. The way Gandalf describes himself, "I was lulled by the words of Saruman the Wise," leaves open the possibility that this was not merely Saruman giving ill counsel, but perhaps working subtle magic against those who saw him as a friend. And the fact that Saruman was still seen as a complete ally at this time is crucially important, not only for the effectiveness of his lie, but also their natural trust in his expertise. Saruman had spent years in Minas Tirith, sometime during the time period of 2500 to 2759, studying in the archives. Saruman was unquestionably the expert when it came to the Rings of Power, and specifically, the one Isildur had carried for 2 years before his death. If anyone remaining in the late Third Age could speak with conviction on the One Ring itself, it was Saruman. Now, over the coming years, Gandalf would certainly notice that Bilbo did not appear to age. While we as readers and viewers know this to be a symptom of the One Ring, Gandalf provides additional reasoning why he wasn't initially suspicious it could be the One. Looking at Bilbo's genealogy, we see he comes from a long-lived family. His maternal grandfather is remembered as the Old Took, and lived to be 130. Even with Bilbo being from a well-preserved family, and Saruman's convincing argument that the ring was swept out to sea, Gandalf had another reason to believe all was well, perhaps the greatest reason of all. What isn't as commonly known, and what is omitted from the films, is that there were more than just the 19 Rings of Power created in Eregion during the Second Age. Before any of the 19 were made, the smiths under Celebrimbor made lesser rings, as Gandalf later tells Frodo in the Fellowship of the Ring. "In Eregion long ago, many elven rings were made, magic rings, as you call them, and they were of course of various kinds, some more potent and some less. The lesser rings were only essays in the craft before it was full grown, and to the elven smiths they were but trifles, yet still to my mind dangerous for mortals. But the great rings, the rings of power, they were perilous." Gandalf essentially comes to the conclusion that Bilbo has likely stumbled upon one of these lesser rings. We don't even know how many were made, and they certainly weren't thought highly of by the elves. Gandalf also knew from his conversation with Saruman at the final White Council that the 9 and 7 rings had jewels on them. The 3 were accounted for between Galadriel, Elrond, and Gandalf himself. Only the lesser rings and the 1 were unadorned by any jewel. But Gandalf notes that Bilbo seems unharmed and unchanged by the ring, and surely the One Ring would have a far worse effect on Bilbo if he indeed possessed it. And now we come to the fateful evening in September 3001. Gandalf, once again in the Shire, sees that Bilbo still has hardly aged in the 60 years since gaining the ring. This gives Gandalf his first true warning that all is not well. Bilbo has certainly passed beyond being well preserved. That night, Bilbo takes a great amount of convincing to follow through with leaving the ring for Frodo, going so far as to imply Gandalf wants it for himself, and placing his hand on the hilt of his small sword while calling the ring his precious. As Gandalf later recounts to Frodo, "He said and did things then that filled me with a fear that no words of Saruman could allay. I knew at last that something dark and deadly was at work, and I have spent most of the years since then in finding out the truth of it." And indeed, this would be the moment Gandalf would launch into his investigation after warning Frodo not to use the ring. Gandalf would still periodically check in on Frodo to see how the ring was or wasn't affecting him. Gandalf also begins to notice there are spies around the Shire of many sorts, even beasts and birds. At his request, the Dunedain double their watch on the Shire, and Gandalf finally confides in Aragorn. Aragorn in turn counsels that they should hunt for Gollum to find out what they could from him. Aragorn proclaims it is fitting that Isildur's heir should labor to repair Isildur's fault. Aragorn and Gandalf searched at length for Gollum, but are not successful for a long time. Nearing despair, Gandalf remembered the words of Saruman at a previous meeting of the White Council. "The ring itself might tell if it were the one. The memory of words at the council came back to me. Words of Saruman, half heeded at the time. I heard them now clearly in my heart. The 9, the 7, and the 3, he said, had each their proper gem,
Not so the one. It was round and unadorned, as if it were one of the lesser rings, but its maker set marks upon it, that the skilled, maybe, could still see and read.
As Saruman continued to say that the ring was swept out to sea, Gandalf decides to go to Minas Tirith himself. Arriving in 3017, Gandalf discovers the Scroll of Isildur, which states, "Already the writing upon it, which at first was as clear as red flame, fadeth, and is now only barely to be read. It is fashioned in an elven script of Eregion, for they have no letters in Mordor for such subtle work. But the language is unknown to me. I deem it to be a tongue of the Black Land, since it is foul and uncouth. What evil it saith I do not know, but I trace here a copy of it, lest it fade beyond recall. The ring misseth maybe the heat of Sauron's hand, which was black and yet burned like fire, and so Gil-galad was destroyed. And maybe were the gold made hot again, the writing would be refreshed. But for my part, I will risk no hurt to this thing. Of all the works of Sauron, the only fair, it is precious to me, though I buy it with great pain." In early 3018, Gandalf makes his way to Mirkwood, where Aragorn has taken the captured Gollum after finding him at long last. Gandalf interrogates the miserable creature, though by now he is merely confirming what he already believes to be true, that Gollum discovered the ring in the very location where Isildur died. With a clear history of the One Ring, and a foolproof way to determine if Frodo's ring is the one, Gandalf returns to the Shire in secret the night of April 12, 3018. The next morning, Gandalf inspects the ring, using fire to reveal its strange markings. "I cannot read the fiery letters," said Frodo in a quavering voice.
"No," said Gandalf, "but I can. The letters are Elvish, of an ancient mode, but the language is that of Mordor, which I will not utter here. But this, in the common tongue, is what is said. One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them." It is only 2 lines of a verse long known in elven lore. 3 rings for the elven kings under the sky, 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, 9 for mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne, in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. 1 ring to rule them all, 1 ring to find them, 1 ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them, in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie.
He paused, and then said slowly in a deep voice,
"This is the Master Ring, the one ring to rule them all. This is the one ring that he lost many ages ago to the great weakening of his power. He greatly desires it, but he must not get it."
Knowing beyond doubt that Frodo's ring is the very ring he has feared, he sends the halfling upon the quest that would lead him first to Rivendell, then onward to Mount Doom. However, there is one last question to be answered. If this ring was indeed the One Ring, why did it take so long for Bilbo to show such symptoms? How could he have seemed unharmed for so long with such an evil object? The answer lies in a dialogue between Frodo and Gandalf shortly after the ring is revealed, when Frodo says of Gollum, "What a pity that Bilbo did not stab that vile creature when he had a chance."
Pity? It was pity that stayed his hand, pity and mercy, not to strike without need, and he has been well rewarded, Frodo. Be sure that he took so little hurt from the evil, and escaped in the end, because he began his ownership of the ring so, with pity.
In the end, it was Bilbo's pity that would save his own life, for the manner of receiving and giving the One Ring is vital. Smeagol murdered Deagol to claim the ring, and he lost it to Bilbo in the caves under the Misty Mountains. But Bilbo began his ownership with an act of pity, and in the end, though it was with the encouragement of his friend Gandalf, Bilbo indeed gave up the ring of his own accord. If Gandalf had taken it from him, it would have destroyed the poor halfling. Instead, the pity for Gollum by both Bilbo and later Frodo and Sam would not only save themselves, but all of Middle-earth. As always, I want to say a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters who make this channel possible. Tom de Bombadil 19, Listen Me the Cinda, Celebrimbor, The Mighty Mim, Team Weasel, Rabbi Rob Thomas, Charles Leisure, Toby Mob's Music, CCDC Red Team, Nerd Sidgman Anytimer, Pelkey Sports Cards, Mookie the Brown, Christopher Carbaugh, Joe Tepper, Sky Carcass, Slide Belts, Dane Ragnarsson, Salim Rahman, Zetrock, Berto Berg, Grand Strategy Nerd, Graham Derricott, The Dark-Haired One, Wyland, Michael Wu, Grant McGregor, and Debbie. If you enjoyed the artwork in this video, check out the artists in the description and purchase prints of their great work for yourself. Thanks so much for watching and subscribing, and we'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings.